I'm Matt at Kult of Athena, and we get asked very often, what katana do I pick? And it can be a bewildering thing to choose from. When you go on the site, you look, and there's hundreds to pick from. So it's like, well, where do you even begin with some of this stuff? You know, there's so many different ways of making the same type of sword, but they're actually very cool, very different, so you don't want to just guess at it. So I have a way that I like to think about it, where I break everything down into 4 broad categories, and that can help eliminate a lot of things and help focus your option, so you kind of know what to sort of target, and then from there you can get into more details. So the 2 main categories are differentially tempered katanas and mono-tempered or through-tempered katanas, and it creates a very different type of blade, particularly in terms of how it actually functions. Now, a differentially tempered katana, you'll notice them right away that they will have a beautiful flame and wave-like haman down the edge. It can vary the design, but that's the most common. And that's created by the edge being tempered in such a way, in a traditional clay-tempered manner, which results in the edge being very hard and the body being softer. Now, there's some pros and cons to this. The pros are that you get a very hard edge of steel that will retain sharpness for longer. So it makes it for an excellent cutting sword. It's also the more traditional way a katana is constructed, and they're frankly just beautiful. Now, there are some cons to this. If you don't have good form when you're cutting with the katana, you can torque the blade as you're passing through the target, and you can bend it. Because of that differentiation of hard and soft steel, that softer steel can take a bend. It can be unbent, but you prefer it not to be there in the first place. Another con to it is that hard edge can be prone to chipping. If you hit like your mat stand, for example, or a target that's too hard, you run the risk of big chips just being flaked right off of the edge. I mean, they're beautiful, but they're good for people who have some experience cutting and have some experience cutting with proper targets. The other type is a mono-tempered or through-tempered katana. And this type of katana, all that means is that this is made in a way that's similar to most other swords, where the steel is just the same type throughout and it's tempered to the same hardness throughout. Now, what that can result in is that results in a blade that it will bend back into shape, even if you, like, for example, if your cutting isn't perfect, the blade will kind of bend back into form and stay straight. So you don't have to worry about your cutting form as much. So that's a real nice pro to them. Another good thing about them is that they're much easier to maintain than a differentially tempered one. That haman and that nice polishing, that can get scratched, and once it's scratched, it's very difficult to fix unless you have very specialized polishing. And if you were to get those fixed up, you usually need to pay someone to do it. They charge you by the inch. Now, a katana like this here that doesn't have that haman that you don't have to worry about with that polishing, you can polish the scratches out and make it nice again after cutting without too great a difficulty. One thing to keep in mind is that cutting will usually, on your targets, will get scratches and scuffs on the blade. So it's something to keep in mind. Some people, they go and buy a very expensive katana and go cut, and they don't realize that that's what can happen. Now, the cons to a through-tempered one, the blade is not as visually beautiful as a more traditionally differentially tempered katana. They're more plain. So they're more of a utilitarian blade in that sort. Another thing is also that the edge will dull a little more quickly than a differentially tempered katana, which has a much harder edge. These can still have quite hard edges, and if you select good targets, it'll still hold its edge for quite a while. But on a technical scale, it will dull a little quicker. So the choice between which way to go, whether you want to go with a differentially tempered katana or a mono-tempered one, is going to be a bit of a personal preference choice. There's pros and cons to both. I find that what a lot of people like to do is that they usually like to have a mono-tempered katana, and that's their primary workaday cutter that they'll use for extensive cutting. And then they might have a differentially tempered katana that they'll keep in good condition, that they want it to look pretty, so they usually end up with like one sword for both uses. And there are some people though who know that they want to do, I want to do some light cutting but not too much, and then they'll still stick with a differentially tempered one. Then there's also people who want that hard edge, they want to have that premium cutting for tatami, and they'll go with a differentially tempered one. So it's a bit of a personal preference choice, pros and cons to both. But once you've figured out whether you want to go with either or, doing that alone cuts down on a lot of the swords that you need to look at. The next filter that you can use to narrow down a selection is whether you want a sword that has a bow-high groove or one that is solid. This makes a huge difference in how the sword feels and handles. This groove here, it's for weight reduction. Reduce the weight of a sword by a few ounces. Doesn't sound like much, but it makes a big difference because it changes the balance of the sword. A sword with a groove in it, it's going to feel much lighter in the hand. It's going to feel quick and swift. So if you want a sword that feels easier to move, that feels quicker in the hand and responsive, you want one with the groove in it. Now, ones that are solid, they feel heavier because they move the point of balance a little further toward the midsection of the blade. But they will feel more authoritative in the cut. And that extra mass helps give it a bit more power and momentum as the sword is cutting through the target. So if you want something that is more decisive in cutting, a solid sword with no groove might be the one for you. If you want something that feels a bit more zippy in the hand, agile, then you want one with the groove.